Hi, this is Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan. So, I thought it might be a good idea to talk about consensus as a different way of organizing groups and activities and change some of the dynamics of the power over, power under kind of society that we have, and try and start practicing what power with would be more like. And so let's see, I'll start off with I moved into a house in Santa Cruz that used a version of consensus process to run the household. It was a 7 bedroom house. We had 10 people living in it at one time. When I was there, it was me and my 2 kids, and then 7 other people, some couples, some not. And what we did, we had weekly meetings, and we had a very specific structure to use in order to clear the air, to be able to communicate what we were feeling in a way that didn't generate arguments, fighting, hurt feelings, although sometimes that was unavoidable, and so forth, and made household decisions using the consensus process. And people often misunderstand what consensus means. They think it means everybody agrees on everything, which is not the case. It's impossible to have a group of people in a setting, in any situation, that will 100% agree on everything that's happening. So let me think. First, we'll talk about the system that the House used. Then I'll talk about protest actions and the process in that environment and so forth that I've participated in. So in the House, we would have things called held feelings. Held feelings could be for an individual in the house, or they could be for the entire household. If they were for an individual, and you said, I have a held feeling for you, your name, then the person was able to decide if they were willing to hear your held feeling or not. Because that is to acknowledge the fact that you're not always in the right frame of mind to be able to listen to how someone else is doing if you have your own stuff happening. And so you can agree, yes, I will hear your held feeling, or no, I will not hear your held feeling at this time. And then the person can't share the held feeling. This is an interesting power dynamic all on its own, recognizing the fact that every person should have autonomy when it comes to agreeing to hear someone else and being informed that something is coming. So that was that part. So if they agreed to listen or hear the held feeling, then the sentence structure for expressing that held feeling had to be done as an actual feeling. So you couldn't go like, you made me mad when you did this, because that is blaming, not taking responsibility for your own stuff. Uh, but you could say, when this happened, I felt very angry, um, and express it in those terms. It changes the feeling it's when you're hearing it. Then it's easy to actually hear what the other person is saying if they are accepting responsibility for their own feelings, and then you, as the person who's had the feeling held against them, are free to decide that this is a way of being that you think you could change or are willing to change or not. There's no requirement that just because in a certain circumstance somebody felt anger or hurt or whatever the feeling happened to be, that it's your responsibility to make them feel better and to change your behavior, because we are all responsible for our own part. Most of the time, in a situation like that, if it was something simple, I don't, if it was something that I could do, I would, and that would be fine. So, there were also, like, okay, here's a situation that happened to me in the house. Because you know me, I'm a storyteller. It's easier to explain things if I tell an actual event instead of just theoretical stuff. So my son overheard one of our housemates talking about the fact that he didn't think that I had a sense of humor and that I knew how to let my hair down and relax. And his idea to make me better was to spike my tea with some drug, acid or something. My son wasn't exactly sure what the plan was, but it was pretty clear from the conversation he overheard that they were planning on dosing me with something without my permission. I consider that assault. Pure and simple. And I had reasons for feeling that way because I had that happen to me without my permission. And after my event with my ego structure being completely and totally dissolved, I was at a party and someone put acid in the wine bottle that I was drinking from. And then I was forced to try and figure out how to deal with all that yet again. Not long after the initial event. So yeah, and really, in reality, forcing someone to do something that they're not willing to do, even if you think it's a good idea and that they would like learn something fantastic from it, is assault. That's pure and simple. So I was very grateful that my son told me. He didn't want to get in trouble. He was a teenager. And so I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to have a held feeling for the house. Now, held feelings for the house, anyone can be willing to hear. And I said, and you're going to say, I will hear it, and then I can talk about my past and what was overheard and how I feel about it and what I would do in the case of certain circumstances actually being followed through on. So indeed, at that weekly meeting, I said I have a held feeling for the house. My son said I will hear it. And so I told the house about what had happened to me when I was dosed with the acid without my knowledge, and how strongly I felt about that, and how severely anyone who did anything like that to me would be punished, because I would immediately go to the police and turn them in and charge them with assault. I did a pretty good job of just sort of laying the whole groundwork for what it was and then saying, and here are the consequences should someone do such a thing. And the guy who my son had overheard saying this piped up and says, it wasn't me, which I thought was hysterical. Talk about putting an arrow right on your head with a big neon sign going, me, I'm the one who did it. I've said that. Please don't be mean to me. But it served its purpose and nothing happened. No one did anything to me. They were all forewarned, and I was able to avoid a potentially dangerous and situation that could have ended me in a hospital somewhere trying to figure out how to deal with the aftermath. So that's one of the reasons why I have very strong feelings about doing things to people without their permission and consent, whether it's love spells or drugging them or, whatever. It seems obvious to me that that should be a bad idea, but apparently not everyone is on the same page. So, so that was a good example of how it could work. And the thing about consensus, the safety valve in consensus process, is that every individual in the group has the power to veto all actions of the group. And, you're only supposed to use that power of veto if the actions that the other members of the group are thinking of doing are not just something that you don't want to participate in, but is so personally abhorrent to you that the idea of anyone doing it is just wrong. And so you have the power to stop the group in its tracks and say, this is a no-go, we're not doing that. What that forces people to do is think in other patterns, think outside the box, come up with alternate ideas, because in reality, in most cases, the person who feels uncomfortable about something that's going on, there's a reason why they're feeling uncomfortable. And if the group is paying attention to that discomfort and validating the fact that they have the right to feel the way that they do, and try and come up with a workaround, then they can come up with a plan that everybody agrees on. It's sort of like the difference between paying attention to your dreams and following your heart versus trying to bulldoze your way through life and decide that you're the one who's in charge regardless of how you might feel about something, and you're going to do it anyway. And in those cases, your subconscious comes along and undermines everything you're going to do. Sort of like, you need to take a break, you're not going to take a break, you're going to power through this and make yourself perform whether you feel like it or not, and then you fall down a flight of stairs and break your leg. And now you're sitting around the house unable to do anything because you didn't listen to yourself, and your subconscious says, hey, I have a say. And so that's one of the reasons it's so important to pay attention to your intuition. So there's a lot of nuances and stuff like that that happen in consensus, but that's sort of the basic of it, is that everyone has a voice. Of course, if you're going to have a voice, then you have to be willing to express how you feel. So it becomes every person's responsibility to be in touch with their feelings and to say how they feel. And that's a way of, again, taking responsibility for your own stuff, not necessarily laying it at everyone else's feet, but you have to know how you feel in order for this to work well. So, Starhawk is a big believer in consensus process and in political protest. She's been a protester from the beginning. I mean, right out of the gate, she started off, and she still is an activist, planetary activist for saving the planet or helping the environment or whatever it happens to be, and has had some pretty incredible experiences along those lines. So, my daughter was, I think, in the 8th grade, and she was going through a crisis at that age because she was learning about nuclear proliferation and energy and weapons and that kind of stuff, and was feeling pretty depressed and about the future and what's the point and that kind of thing. And I happened to notice that there was a Mother's Day protest at the Nevada test site that year. And so I signed us up and I took her to the protest because I wanted her to see in person that you can either wring your hands and pull out your hair and woe is me, or you can actually get out and do something about it, and to see that other people were trying to do something about it. And the end result of what we did, we actually succeeded in stopping the reliability tests of nuclear weapons at the Nevada test site, which was pretty cool that we succeeded in our protests. But participating in that, I took training in nonviolent protest, which is actually a very active form of protest and something that you need to be very much aware of if you're going to participate in it. And it was a very interesting learning experience, and consensus process is one of the things that they used in the protest environment and so forth, when you're together with your individual groups and so forth and whatnot. So if you're training to be a nonviolent protester, one of the things you need to know is that you're making a commitment to not fight back. You can take it to the extreme of not cooperating at all with the police, which is what happens when they have to pick people up and carry them. They're going limp and they're not helping their process, which often makes people in power extremely angry because they feel put out and they're annoyed and they take it out on the person, which I witnessed in person myself. And so the point of taking the training is to become aware of what's the potential and not to judge other people for their choices. So in that environment, people could choose to use an alternate name, like a fake name. They could choose to use their real name. They were informed what the consequences would be of both of those choices so they could make an informed decision. They were told that it wasn't okay for them to judge other people for making a different decision because no one can know everyone's life history, the circumstances that they were in. I went to the Nevada test site 3 times, and the first time I was there as support for the group of people that were being arrested. The next 2 times I was there and got arrested for my part. And yeah, it's a very interesting thing to experience from that side of the line, I guess. Because we were, trying to highlight something that was seriously wrong, and having the media there definitely helped to keep us safe, because then if the media is watching, there's less likelihood, at least here in the United States, of people being seriously injured. It doesn't stop at all, but it does definitely make an impact. So at one of the larger actions, we were using consensus to decide what we were going to be doing. This was one that had 5,000 people at it. It was a very large action, and I think about 1,200 of us got arrested. One of the largest groups to be arrested in U.S. history, apparently, at the time. I don't know if the stats have changed or not, but it was a pretty big group. And the law enforcement knew that there was going to be a large contingent, and so they built these gigantic chain link enclosures, 2 of them, one for the men and one for the women, which turned out to be pretty hysterical in retrospect. And they hired the Wackenhut, which is a private security force, to do the arresting and pulling of people in and that kind of stuff, which was probably a liability issue for them. So then they couldn't be blamed for any injuries, and there were a few of those injuries. People got sued as a consequence of some of that stuff that happened there. But since there were so many people, I mean, the idea and consensus that everyone has a voice, it's not possible to do with 5,000 individuals because you would never get through a meeting. You'd be there for like a month trying to get everybody a chance to even spend 5 minutes. So their approach to that kind of a large situation was that, you were in smaller groups, and as a group, you talked about everything. And as a group, you came up with what your group was willing to do and was not willing to do. And then in the larger setting, the individuals from the group would stand up and state what their group had decided. And that was a way for us to figure out our approach. And yeah, there was so much stuff going on. It was very interesting. So the morning of the event comes, and we all head off into the desert in different directions. My group got about a mile in, I think, before we got picked up, and we were cooperating, so we just went. And what was funny about the enclosures that they had was they were separating men from women, or so they thought. They didn't always get it right, because they really weren't on top of people with short hair could be girls and people with long hair could be boys. I mean, so they had to like resort us several times to try and make sure that everyone was in the right enclosure. And they put like a cardboard between the two because the fence in the middle was just another, chain link, thinking that would keep us from talking to each other, which of course it didn't. People climbed up and yelled through and talked, and so the men in the women's group coordinated what we were going to do. And during that action, I actually participated in one of the largest spiral dances ever done. All of the women, we started chanting, and we started dancing, and we started a spiral dance. And the look on the guards' faces was priceless because they were like, what do we do? There's a mass of bodies moving in all directions right now. There's no way to separate these people out because they're one organism. It was very powerful. I loved it. And after we were done, they started loading us on buses. So, which turned out to be illegal. They bussed us 110 miles and dropped us off in the middle of a small town in nowhere, Nevada. We actually outnumbered the town folk, I think. So that was interesting. They figured that would, put a damper on our activities because they were trying to get us the heck out of there. And of course, every time a bus got loaded, and they loaded men on one bus, women on the other bus, and it started to leave the support system because for every one person that gets arrested, you need about 3 people to be in a support team. It's sort of important because you got to have somebody taking care of your stuff back at camp, somebody following the bus, and then somebody else to coordinate the two ends kind of thing and let everybody know what's going on so that it's not a big surprise. And so every time a bus left, about 10 cars would leave and follow the bus. So it was a several hour drive, but by the time I got there, I think I spent about 20 minutes in town before I got a ride back to camp. That year, my daughter had come. Santa Cruz had sent us off by bus, and Santa Cruz was a great community. They were very supportive of this whole thing. The mayor came out to wish us well when we were on our way to the Nevada test site. So yeah, so I knew my daughter would be safe because she was going to have to go home without me. And then I had to try and find a ride back to Santa Cruz, so that was an adventure in and of itself. But on the bus that I was on, understanding the dynamics of people that are in power or believe that they should be in power and what happens when they feel threatened is important when you're in that kind of an action, because you need to pay attention to their body language, what they're saying, how they're acting, and so forth, to make sure that you don't activate the bad things that can happen when they feel threatened, like, people getting hurt. And the woman who was sitting next to me on that bus ride, it was clear had never done any training and had no understanding of what to expect. She was panicking, completely freaking out. She was like, and I could see that the driver and the 2 guards up front, who were pretty close to where we were starting to like ruffle big time. And so I spent that ride calming this person I never knew and never saw again down to make sure she didn't start a riot in the bus. On one of my roommates' bus, when he went, he had a pair of fingernail clippers, and he kept undoing all the handcuffs because they used the plastic handcuffs. So they finally gave up on his bus. They couldn't keep handcuffs on anybody, so they finally stopped, apparently, according to him. So the power of a group working together is intimidating for authority, and this is definitely a direct confrontation between power over, power under, and the idea and concept of power with. That we have the right to protest, to say what is and is not important to us, and that kind of thing, and know why we're doing it. So Uh, yeah, it was interesting. And because of this, my daughter wanted to do her own protest, and because I was a single parent, I was a single parent. I had two kids, and I wouldn't let her get arrested in Nevada, excuse me. I wouldn't let her get arrested in Nevada because I wasn't sure how that state would react to me as the parent allowing my daughter to get arrested as an underage child. So I told her she had to find a local protest in Santa Cruz area and a group her age that was going to go there so she wouldn't be alone. And so she did, which was very much to my chagrin, but I'm like, okay. And it was a group of teenagers from a local high school. They were about ready to age out of being juveniles, and they decided they wanted to do this. The Lockheed uh, Martin was manufacturing the Trident II missile system up in the mountains outside of Santa Cruz, and so it seemed like a worthy action because there was only one reason for those missiles, and that was as a first strike weapon, which sort of went along with the whole point of why we were protesting the Nevada test site and so forth. Like, this is not the way to go. You can't do this. So I went to all of their meetings, but here's where I discovered that not everybody understands what they need to tell their support people. When I was doing the training, they told us if you are going to do non-cooperation, you need to let your support people know that so that they can emotionally prepare for seeing you get hurt. This is a very important thing. If you're going to succeed at being nonviolent, you need to be prepared to watch someone you love be injured by the police. And they never told me or my daughter, for that matter, who was in their group, that they were going to non-cooperate. And as a group, we put them out first because they were the youngest and we wanted to get them out of the way, out of harm's way, figuring that they were just going to do their part and then go to juvie and we could go pick them up afterwards and that would be fine. And so my daughter's in this line. There's a line of kids on the road. We're stopping traffic. That's what our crime is. We're impeding progress. And the police come and they start taking the first kid and he non-cooperates. And I'm like, what? Like, wait a minute. And then the next one non-cooperates. I'm going like, what? Excuse me? And it goes down the line. And my daughter apparently is doing the same thing. She's going like, what? No one said we were going to do this. So by the time I'm sitting there like thinking thoughts into my daughter's head, I'm going like, cooperate, 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 because I'm not sure if I can stop myself from leaping over the heads of the crowd and jumping on the back of a police officer to stop him from hurting my daughter. I am not emotionally prepared for this. My daughter cooperates, thank goodness, and they injured her wrist anyway, and she says, "Why are you doing that?" I'm cooperating because they were mad by then. The Santa Cruz police force was terrible. They were not very. The ones in Nevada were on our side. They thought what we were doing was good because they didn't want to have all the nuclear radiation and stuff that was happening in their area. But the ones in Santa Cruz did not have the same kind of feelings towards our action. So I was there as support, but there really wasn't much for me to do after they were taken away because I stayed for the rest of the action. And there were some interesting moments, power meeting power, and the crowd mind reacting to it. There was this one moment that was so vivid where the crowd, dressed in like masks of Reagan and rockets on their crotches and all this other stuff, and they were sort of surging towards the police line, and you could see the police like freaking out, and it was so obvious, and the whole crowd felt it as a single unit, and all backed off at the same time, which was amazing. Amazing to see that happen. I was really quite concerned at that point that something bad was going to go down. And then they started arresting people. And I wasn't being arrested because I was support for my daughter. I couldn't get arrested otherwise. She had no way to get home. So I'm standing there and I'm watching. And one of the most intense and powerful things I've ever seen, and horrific things I've ever seen. So, trigger warning here. This is a possible event that would maybe disturb you, because it certainly disturbed me. There was one woman who did complete non-cooperation. We're talking, she didn't lift a finger. She didn't help the police arrest her at all. And she was singing. She was singing a song about the Enola Gay, which was one of the weapons that was dropped on Japan. And the name of the ship that carried the weapons, Big Boy and it was Big Boy and Little Boy, or I can't remember the name that they named the bombs right now. But the Enola Gay was the actual ship that carried the bombs to Hiroshima and Nagasaki and dropped them on the Japanese people. I had never heard the song before. I don't know that I've ever heard the song again. And this woman had an incredible voice, absolutely rich voice, and it infuriated the police because she was keeping her power and they were trying to take it away. This is a very clear example of power over, trying to destroy what they see as a threat and put it down, put it in the right place. And they were carrying her with her arms behind her back, lifting her entire body weight. She dislocated, I think, both of her shoulders. And they were bouncing her face into the asphalt of the road as they were going. And the entire time they were doing this, she continued to sing. She never was off a note, but you could hear the pain in her voice, which is such a bizarre thing. It's hard to describe what that actually is like. I hope to never hear that again. And at the end of it, they threw her face down into the police wagon. So they probably scratched her face up pretty good because they head first and slammed her into the other end of the paddy wagon before they took her off to jail. And I didn't know anyone else there at the protest. And there was a woman who was standing next to me, and witnessing this event was so powerful and so intense that she and I were hugging each other. We were just like arms wrapped around each other and sobbing. And she's asking me, like, why are they doing this? I said, I don't know. We're just trying to save lives. And there was a police officer who was standing in front of us, and he was like, well, probably like that far from my face. He was like right there in front of me, and his face, the look on his face was like torment, confusion, haunted. I mean, and he couldn't do anything or didn't do anything, and we were there witnessing. We were being the witnesses for what was taking place. And I think that us being genuine about what was happening and how we were feeling about it changed that person. I doubt that he was ever the same again after that protest. I'm not sure exactly how he would have changed, hopefully for the better, but you never know. But it was no doubt that that was our part of that particular protest action, was witnessing this cruelty. I mean, they could have had two other guys pick her up by her legs and carried her without harming her body. When they got her back to the jail, they strip searched her numerous times. She ended up suing the city, and I believe she won her case for mistreatment. And that's one of the other things, too, about having your support team. so that they're on top of your legal issues and so forth. And I know that, in other countries around the world where protests are happening and people are getting murdered by the police, that's a much higher level of danger and so forth that's happening. But this all came out, of course, India initially, the act of nonviolent protest, which is not a non-action. It's a very active state to be in. And consensus was one of the processes that we used in order to accomplish that end. So when it comes to group work, I was a member of an investment club for a while. We started it with the idea of consensus. And apparently, after other people got in and didn't understand what that meant, to us it meant, I feel uncomfortable with us investing in this company, so we can find a different company to invest in, something all of us can feel comfortable with. They didn't like that, so they started using democracy, or, mass rule, majority rule, which of course made a lot of people very unhappy, especially me, but not just me, there were several of us. And we had sort of stalled out and gotten to the point where we wanted to kind of reinvent our club and go back to the consensus process. And so I was involved in helping to rewrite our bylaws, then going back to that as a process. And I missed the meeting where we were going to approve it. And the the result of that meeting that I wasn't at, I got a call from the, at the time, president of the club, informing me that what they decided was that when people had an idea, they should tell everybody the idea and then leave the room so that everyone could talk about the idea when they weren't there. And I'm like, excuse me? I'm sorry, are we in the third grade? Or what? You want me to leave the room so you can talk about me behind my back and then call me back in and let me know what you decided? That's not how this works. So I quit the club. I said, I'm not going to participate in any kind of a group dynamic that's going to encourage this kind of behavior. This is bullying. This is not okay. And within 2 months, the club dissolved completely. I had no idea I was the glue that kept it going. Because, really, it should have kept on going, because then everybody was happy with what they had decided, but nope, it didn't. So yeah, it's interesting. So the idea that you can stop a group from doing something that you feel morally imperative not to do, like I said in the beginning, is supposed to be the rule. In our household in Santa Cruz, people abuse that all the time. We weren't allowed to get keys for our doors and lock our door because one person thought it was inconvenient to have to use a key to come in and out of the house. And she had been successfully, I say in quotes, sexually assaulted in a locked house, so she didn't see there was much point. That would be an abuse of consensus. That's not, if she didn't want it, I mean, really, in my opinion. But we never got keys because of that. So, we followed through on our commitment to her being able to say no. So, in the magical groups that I've run and been a part of, I've always assumed that consensus is the model because, I believe in power with, not power over, power under. And interestingly enough, because of that, when people wanted to do something that I was definitely not okay with, like, I'm not participating in doing this with you, and you're definitely not doing this in my temple. If you want to do this, this is fine. You can go ahead and do this, but you will be doing it somewhere else and not here. I have a reputation in town of being it's her way or the highway. And I'm like, if that's what your definition of that is, then I guess the answer is yes, it is. But it's only for those things. I'm pretty open to all kinds of ideas. So, it is a way to organize groups of people, and a way to learn better communication skills, and a way of acknowledging people's individual responsibility to speak their own heart and mind, and to pay attention to how they feel about stuff, and what is and is not okay with them. So it's interesting. And it certainly was very powerful in India when Gandhi started this, because the pictures of people standing passively, not fighting back, being beaten by the British was very potent, which is what it was about for them. It just seemed like a good thing to talk about. I'm not sure now why exactly, but I know that it relates, because what we want to do, we want to change how society works, how it's structured. It isn't working the way it is. It doesn't work that there's a bunch of people that have all the power and who are in charge and just get to decide for everyone how it's going to go. That doesn't work well. There's always going to be conflict at some point when the people that are being forced to do something they don't want to rise up. And that is historic all throughout history. Civilizations rise and fall, but then they're replaced by the same civilization, which rises and fall. And so my vision, I guess, of the future of a better society is going to involve a different kind of power dynamic, and this is one way to practice it, the power with, even if it's only in small groups of people. Yeah. So if we don't have some kind of an idea of how to do it, then we can't get it accomplished. I think there are encouraging signs out there as far as people who are, walking a different path and interacting in a different way. And certainly the relationship I have with Ian is a good example of how power with can be very positive and can work extremely well and gets rid of a lot of conflict, fighting, feeling not being heard, all that stuff. It doesn't happen if you actually respect the other person and are willing to listen and look at yourself and willing to see where you are in that dynamic and what is yours to take care of. So personal responsibility is a part of consensus, and is really pretty much built into that model. So anyway, hopefully this will generate a lot of questions or ideas or stimulate things. I don't know. But we decided it was a good subject to talk about at least once. Because if we're going to be doing magic and we're going to be doing witchcraft or ritual or whatever, it's good to think of things along a different pathway so that we can change how we work together. So I guess that's it for today. This is Siofra Bradigan, and this has been Siofra's Magic Alcove. Blessed be.